Identity politics, kinda like the term cancel culture, means different things to different people. Identity politics, as generally defined, is reasonable, crucial even. From Wikipedia, identity politics is a term that describes a political approach wherein people of a particular religion, race, social background, class, or other identifying factor develop political agendas and organize based upon the interlocking systems of oppression that affect their lives and come from their various identities. Identity politics centers the lived experiences of those facing various systems of oppression to better understand the ways in which racial, economic, sex-based, gender-based, and other forms of oppression are linked, and to ensure that political agendas and political actions arising out of identity politics leave no one behind. Cool, nothing to disagree with there. But the Wikipedia article acknowledges that the term has been employed in myriad cases with radically different connotations depending on the context. There's the right-wing framing, where identity politics, as defined above, is considered toxic. Conservatives are spooked by the mere suggestion that oppression is systemic. The right-wing solution to racism is to just stop talking about it. This is deeply misguided and a whole other topic. Then there's the left-wing framing, which, depending on who you're talking to and their understanding of the term, can be positive or negative. I will be critiquing a specific, insidious form of identity politics, which I've also heard referred to as identitarianism. Ironically, conservatives will often engage in this toxic form of identity politics, while decrying rational identity politics. Think Dave Rubin, a gay man, Candace Owens, a black woman, and Blair White, a trans woman. These figures are very valuable to conservative media because of their marginalized identities. Their success operates off the myth that a gay or trans person cannot possibly be bigoted towards the LGBTQ community, and a black person cannot possibly be racist towards the black community. They completely ignore or dismiss the concept of internalized oppression. Neoliberal Democrats also weaponize identity politics against the left. If you criticize Kamala Harris, it's because you're racist and sexist. The Democrats and Republicans are united in their use of identity politics to uphold capitalism. But what I really want to focus on in this video is the use of identity politics by leftists. And by leftists, I mean anti-capitalists. As someone who is anti-capitalist and interested in dismantling all forms of oppression, I find it incredibly frustrating when I see other leftists holding double standards and making fallacious appeals to identity. No matter who is engaged in identity politics, be it conservatives, neoliberals, or leftists, it always ends up hurting the left. This video was partly inspired by a book I read a while ago by Ben Burgess titled "Give Them an Argument: Logic for the Left." It's not uncommon for leftists to shit on logic bros or debate me bros. But what makes these people annoying is not their use of logic. It's their condescending attitude, lack of humility, and most notably, their obnoxious confidence when they're flat out wrong about something. We can make fun of logic bros without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You can value logic, critical thinking, and even debate without exhibiting the stereotypical machismo debate me bro traits. There is something to be said about the importance of maintaining credibility when it comes to being an effective advocate. We lose credibility when we're uncharitable to our opponents and make fallacious arguments. Attacking people's character, assuming bad intent, and dismissing their arguments based on their privileged identity are not effective argumentation strategies. We're not winning people over this way. We have reason and data on our side. For example, race is a social construct that has no basis in biology. Yet the data shows quite alarming racial disparities in income, employment, our criminal justice system. Watch the movie 13th and then tell me that systemic racism is a liberal hoax. And I recognize that racism extends beyond hard data. I understand how specific microaggressions contribute to the problem. But I understand because it was explained to me in a way that made sense. T1J has some very insightful videos on this topic. I know how frustrating it is when you provide a well-reasoned argument and it's ignored or dismissed. But what I think people forget sometimes is that there are open-minded people out there. And open-minded people are persuaded by compelling arguments, not brash accusations and unsubstantiated assertions. It can be laborious, but it's worth it to back up your claims. What I'm talking about specifically is the people who demand that we listen to marginalized people, but only the ones who support their specific narrative. Or if a person with a marginalized identity makes an accusation of bigotry against a person with a privileged identity, they're not to be questioned whatsoever. As if they are the arbiter of what is and isn't racist, sexist, or transphobic. And if the accused dares to defend themselves, they're deemed fragile and oppressive. It could very well be the case that they're being fragile and oppressive, but it's not always the case. The reason this is so problematic is because there's no consensus among marginalized people as to what constitutes oppressive language or behavior. Take critical race theory, for example, the boogeyman. This is a broad category of academic study. Critical race theorists don't all agree with each other. I mean, obviously there's a general agreement that racism is a problem and it's systemic. But there's variance of opinion and strategy. One example that comes to mind is this notion that you can't be racist towards white people. While it's true that white people don't face systemic oppression, this argument never really made sense to me. However, some racial scholars like Ibram Kendi disagree. His argument, which he lays out in his book How to Be an Anti-Racist, made a lot of sense to me. Because of this variance of opinion, I think it's rational to listen to a variety of marginalized voices and evaluate the merits of their arguments. This includes conservatives. The harm in listening to Candace Owens comes from trusting her as an authority and only listening to people who parrot the same talking points. Listen to Thomas Sowell, listen to John McWhorter, listen to Coleman Hughes, but also listen to their critics. A relevant example to this channel is this idea that if you're a white vegan, you shouldn't use words like slavery to describe the plight of non-human animals. The implication is that you're only allowed to use this word if you're black? This doesn't hold up because people of all races throughout history have been enslaved, and non-human animals are currently enslaved. To this day, black people have been compared to animals, and this is blatantly racist because we live in a speciesist society where non-human animals are viewed as inferior. But in the context of animal rights advocacy, raising the status of non-human animals does not lower the status of non-whites. I recognize from a strategic standpoint that making direct comparisons to historic events such as the Holocaust or the enslavement of African Americans is best left to those who have generational ties. But the fact that some people find the mere use of words like slavery offensive is not a compelling reason for me to stop using accurate terminology. Anyone can claim offense, and if this is your standard, something is racist simply because a person of color says so. No explanation required. The fact that non-white conservatives exist and non-white leftists are not a monolith reveals an internal contradiction in this standard. If people of color hold conflicting views, how can we possibly decipher what is or isn't racist? Something is racist if there's a reasonable explanation for how it perpetuates racism. No one is the arbiter of reason, but we can flesh these things out by talking about them and constructing arguments. We will never solve the problem of racism by demanding white people bow down to people of color, because this is a form of racism. It implies that a white person's ideas about racism are always inferior to a person of color's. I'm no racial scholar, nor have I experienced racial oppression, but I believe that my ideas regarding racism are more sound than Candace Owens. To suggest otherwise is to perpetuate racism, and not just anti-white racism, but anti-black racism. Holding this standard is people-pleasing on steroids. It is impossible to please everyone, so attempting to is futile. The irony is that white SJWs who abandon logic to appease non-white SJWs end up pissing off non-white leftists who reject this type of identity politics. You can't win, so you might as well piss off the people who lack good arguments. I mean, I don't know about you, but I would rather win the favor of people who value logic and reason. Another problem with this type of identity politics is that it produces a black and white, good versus evil mentality. The world is divided into oppressors versus the oppressed. In reality, oppressed people can also be oppressors. People of color can be misogynistic, gay people can be racist, women can be transphobic. Everyone is fucking speciesist. Within social justice circles, people with marginalized identities are presumed to be more innocent than cis white men, and more often given the benefit of the doubt. And that is a form of bigotry. We will not achieve total liberation by replicating the behaviors and attitudes we are seeking to dismantle. By playing into the irrational SJW stereotype, you're giving the right a gift, an excuse to not take the left seriously. Much like how playing into the self-righteous vegan stereotype doesn't help the vegan movement. Of course, these people do not represent the left or veganism, and a large portion of the blame is on conservatives and carnists for not thinking critically and acknowledging this. But these SJWs I'm referring to, who happen to be vegan, understand that people like Freely do not represent the vegan movement well, yet they lack the self-awareness to see how their attitude towards people who disagree with them politically is not much different from Freely's attitude towards meat eaters. They insist that we need to be patient and kind towards non-vegans, but then go on an unfollowing spree to demonstrate their zero tolerance for racism or sexism or other forms of bigotry towards humans. If that ain't speciesism. This might seem like a strange tangent, but I was talking to my best friend the other day about Twilight, reminiscing about the blogging Twilight series on Spark Life. If you aren't familiar, I would go on the SparkNotes website a lot in high school, and there was this very distracting side column called Spark Life. This guy Dan, a grown man, decided to read the entire Twilight series and blog about it, and it was comedy gold. His illustrations had me dying. Anyways, when I first read the series, I was obsessed, like most teenage girls. I thought it was just the pinnacle of literature. And Dan, bless him, broke me from my delusion by exposing how terribly written it was. He nicknamed Alice Plot Device because her superpower was so obviously a plot device. She would have these random visions that would conveniently move the story along, but she was unable to harness her powers when it would interfere with the story. I feel like this is how people use identity politics. They use it when it's convenient for them and it serves their narrative, but they reject it when it's used against them. Okay, this is not the best analogy, I just thought it was funny. In conclusion, not every criticism of woke culture is coming from the right. My issue with identity politics is that its toxic form does not align with true leftist values. It is authoritarian and punitive in nature, and it perpetuates racism, speciesism, transphobia, etc. And as a leftist, I am against all of these things. Thank you so much for watching, let me know what you think down below, and stay tuned for next week. I thought it was just the pinnacle of literature. Anyways.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them